She had learned by then what beauty cost. It cost her husband, it cost her name, it cost the roof above her head and the ground beneath her feet, and every dignified thing she had ever been allowed to call her own. And so she covered her face. The veil was black, heavy silk, fine woven, falling from the crown of her head to the base of her throat. It revealed nothing except her eyes, which were dark and still, and said very little to those who did not know how to read them. She had chosen black deliberately. Black did not invite. Black did not welcome. Black said, "Do not come closer." Black said, "There is nothing here for you." She walked through the market roads of Calden with her spine straight and her steps even, and no one accosted her. They parted. They glanced. Some crossed to the other side of the road. A woman in black veiling, moving with quiet certainty through the public roads. She looked like something official, something untouchable. Let them think it. Snow had stopped caring what people thought the morning they stripped her husband's rank from her shoulders and threw her out of the pack gates with nothing but the clothes on her back and the memory of their screaming in her ears. Shame, shame, shame. She could still feel the things that had struck her, a handful of soil, something wet, a stone that had caught the edge of her cheekbone and left a bruise that took 3 weeks to fade. She could still hear Gad's voice beneath the crowd's roar, calm, so terribly calm, as he watched from his raised platform with his hands clasped behind his back and his expression arranged into something that resembled sadness. He had not looked sad. She knew what he looked like when he wanted something. She had watched that look cross his face too many times in the months after Edric died. In the quiet of her own home, when he came to offer comfort, and the comfort kept arriving with conditions she had not agreed to. She had refused him. She had refused them all, and so they had destroyed her instead. Snow walked until Calden's market gave way to the wide stone roads that led toward the palace district. The city was vast, larger than anything she had known in her pack's territory, and the people here did not know her face. They did not know her name. She was no one's widow and no one's ruined woman. She was simply a figure in a black veil, moving with purpose, and they made room for her without thinking twice about why. It was the first relief she had felt in longer than she could name. She had come here by accident, almost. Or not accident, necessity. She had walked until she could not walk further without crossing into another kingdom's land, and this was the kingdom she had found herself in. Alpha King Lucas's territory, large, ordered, prosperous in a way that her old pack had never been. The roads were maintained. The market traders looked fed. Even the poorest quarters of Calden had a certain dignity to them that made her chest ache with something she could not quite name. She had been sleeping in a wayhouse 2 streets from the merchant district when she first saw them. 3 women in black veils, moving together, unhurried, down the center of a wide road, and the people around them stepped aside the same way they had stepped aside for Snow. Not out of fear, exactly, but out of something like instinctive recognition. These women belonged to something with weight. Snow had followed them at a distance. She could not have said why, except that she recognized the feeling of the veil, the deliberateness of it, the armor of it. These women had chosen to cover themselves too, and whatever their reason, they did not look like women who had been broken. They looked like women who could not be touched. She found out later what they were: the Tribunal, the King's Court of Justice, its investigative arm, its conscience. Women who studied law and evidence and human nature with the same rigor that men studied war. They covered their faces so that no alliance, no resentment, no personal feeling could compromise their judgment, so that when they delivered findings, they delivered them clean. Snow stood in the street long after they had gone and felt something shift in the hollow center of her chest. She had made a vow, standing at those pack gates with the bruise still rising on her cheek. No man would see her face again. Not for pleasure, not for politics, not for pity. Her beauty had been used as a weapon against her, first to attract, then to frame, then to condemn. She was done with it. If the moon goddess had seen fit to place such a face on such a woman and call it a gift, then the moon goddess could keep it. Snow wanted no part of it, but covering her face was not the same as disappearing. She had spent 3 days asking careful questions before she found the tribunal's residential quarters. She had spent one more day outside the gates, watching, steadying herself. Then she had walked up to the entrance and asked to speak with the head of the tribunal. Lady Corinne had received her without ceremony. She was a small woman, older, with silver-threaded hair and the calm eyes of someone who had heard every kind of lie and every kind of truth, and had learned to tell them apart by something subtler than words. She looked at Snow, at the veil, at the posture, at the hands that were too still to be entirely at peace, and she did not ask Snow to remove anything. "What do you want from us?" Corinne asked. "A place," Snow said, "and work that means something." Corinne studied her for a long moment. "You understand that women of this tribunal take a vow. No mating, no courtship, no man in your private life while you serve." "I understand," Snow said. "And this doesn't trouble you." Snow thought of Edric, of his voice in the mornings, low and warm, telling her things he never said to anyone else, of the way he had loved her, not like a trophy, not like a conquest, but like a person, like the most important person in any room he ever entered. She thought of how that love had not been enough to save him, how Gad had sent him to the front of a battle he was never meant to survive and called it duty. "I lost my mate," Snow said. "I have no desire to be with a man again. What I want is work, purpose, and the protection of something no one can take from me." Corinne was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, "One condition. While you serve, your face stays covered, always. In public, in the king's court, in the streets of this city. The veil stays on." "That," Snow said softly, "is not a condition, it is a comfort." And so she had stayed. That had been 4 months ago. Now she walked the palace roads like she belonged to them, and in a way she did. She was learning faster than any of the other women who had joined the tribunal in recent years. Corinne had said so quietly, after the 3rd week. Snow read case files the way she had once read the books her mother left her, hungrily, completely, with the kind of attention that made every detail matter. She was beginning to understand the paths of human wrongdoing, the shapes injustice made, the way guilt arranged itself differently than grief, and how most people in power could not tell them apart because they had never needed to. She understood both from the inside, and that, she was beginning to realize, was the sharpest tool she had. The King's Court convened on the 1st and 3rd day of every week. Snow attended as an observer still. Corinne had been clear that new tribunal members did not speak during proceedings, only watched and learned the form of things. She stood with the other black-veiled women in their designated section to the left of the throne and watched Alpha King Lucas deliver verdicts with the authority of a man who had grown up understanding that his word was the last word and had chosen, somewhere along the way, to take that responsibility seriously. She had not expected to respect him. She had come to the tribunal with her distrust of powerful men worn close as a second skin. Lucas was an Alpha King, which meant he was the most powerful man in this territory, which meant she had assumed he would be the most dangerous. She had spent the first 2 court sessions watching for the cruelty, the casual dismissal, the boredom that powerful men carried like a cologne when they had been obeyed for too long. She had not found it. What she found instead was a man who listened, who asked questions before delivering judgments, who sometimes said, "I want more evidence before I rule on this," and meant it and waited. He was not soft. His verdicts, when they came, were firm and without apology, but there was a precision to his justice that she had not expected and could not dismiss. It unsettled her in ways she did not examine. The day the boy was brought in, it was raining. She could hear it against the high windows of the throne room, a low, continuous sound beneath the murmur of the assembled court. The boy was young, barely past his first shift by the look of him, and he held himself with the particular stillness of someone trying not to show how frightened they were. The charge was theft. Not common theft. The stolen item was a vial of Morellian essence, a compound used in the making of certain rare medicinal preparations, and worth, in the quantities allegedly taken, more than most people in Calden earned in a year. The noble who had brought the charge was a man named Phoethus, heavyset and certain of himself in the way that men who have never been seriously wrong tend to be certain. 2 witnesses, Phoethus said. Both saw a young man of this approximate age and Bill leaving my estate through the east gate at the time of the theft. The boy, his name was Cain, shook his head without lifting his eyes. I wasn't there, he said. I don't know where his estate is. He would say that, Phoethus replied, as though this settled the matter. Snow watched. She watched the boy's hands. She watched the way Phoethus spoke, not to Lucas, not to the tribunal, but to the room, to the audience, as though what mattered was not the truth, but the performance of certainty. She watched the witnesses standing to the side with their arms crossed and their eyes directed carefully away from Cain. She knew this shape. She knew it the way a person knows the smell of rain before the sky has opened. She had lived inside this exact shape. The arranged evidence, the borrowed certainty. The boy who said I wasn't there and was not believed, because powerful men had already decided the story. Corinne was about to speak. The verdict was forming. Snow could feel it in the shift of air, the way Lucas's expression had settled into the particular gravity of a man preparing to rule. And something in her rose up before she could stop it. Stop. The word left her mouth before she fully understood she had spoken it. The court went silent in a single breath. Every head turned. Corinne turned. Lucas turned. Snow stood with her heart hammering so loudly, she was certain the women beside her could hear it. She had not meant to speak. The rules were clear. She was an observer. She was still learning. She was not supposed to. What? Said Corinne in a voice like a closed door. Are you doing? Snow did not sit down. She could not explain why, except that she had sat down once before, had sat down and said nothing and watched injustice assemble itself piece by piece into a verdict, and the cost of that silence had been everything. She was not the same woman who had sat down. She was not going to be. The boy may be telling the truth, she said. Her voice was steady. She was surprised to find it steady. Myrelian essence leaves a blue stain in the skin of anyone who handles it directly. It cannot be washed out for weeks, not even with the most thorough cleaning. If he touched it, it is still on his hands. And there is a preparation, a compound soaked into white cloth, that will make the stain visible even where it cannot be seen by the naked eye. Silence. Then Lucas leaned forward on his throne, and his eyes, sharp, dark, attentive, moved from the veiled line of tribunal women until they found her. Tell me, he said, exactly how you would carry this out. Corinne exhaled through her nose. The sound was not agreement, but she did not speak, and Snow, with her heart still loud against her ribs, began to explain. She asked for every young man in the city of Cain's approximate age and billed to be summoned to the court. The order went out. It took an hour. They came in lines, confused, some of them frightened, others irritated, and filed into the great hall until it was crowded and warm with the smell of bodies and damp wool. The white cloth was brought. The compound, steeped from a preparation Snow described precisely from memory, from a text she had read 3 winters ago in her husband's library, when she had been simply a woman who loved books and had no reason to think such knowledge would ever matter, was applied. One by one, most hands came back clean, or clean enough. The 17th man pressed the cloth between his palms, and when he lifted it away, his hands had gone blue. Not Cain. A merchant's courier, 22 years old, who had been at Phoethus's estate on an errand and had seen the vial and taken it and said nothing, because no one had thought to look at him. The court was not quiet this time. It erupted. Cain was released. The courier was taken into custody. Phoethus looked at his witnesses and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Snow stood very still in her place among the tribunal women, and let herself breathe. She did not see Lucas rise from his throne until Corinne's hand touched her arm, a brief, urgent pressure. She looked up. He was crossing the floor toward them. The tribunal women shifted, creating a subtle movement of deference. Lucas stopped a few feet away, and his gaze moved along the line of veiled faces with an expression she recognized. He was looking for something specific, someone specific. "The woman who spoke," he said. "I want to thank her." No one moved. Snow did not move. "It was a group effort, Your Majesty," one of the other women said smoothly. "The tribunal works as one." Lucas looked at the speaker. Then his gaze traveled the line again, slower this time, and stopped on Snow. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't." He had watched them for years, he said. He had seen how they moved, how they stood, how they held their silence during proceedings. There was something about her that was different from the others. Something in the way she had risen, the way she had planted her feet. "I think," he said, "it was you." Snow's pulse was loud in her own ears. "I'm afraid Your Majesty is mistaken," she said. He held hers for a moment, or held the place where her gaze was, behind the veil, which was not the same thing but felt uncomfortably close to it. Then he inclined his head. "Very well," he said, and stepped back. Snow walked out of the throne room with the other women, and did not look behind her. But her heart did not slow for a long time after. She had kept her vow. No man would see her face. No man would know her. She had been invisible, and she had saved the boy, and she had walked away clean. That was enough. It had to be enough. She did not think about the way Lucas's eyes had found her in the line. Did not think about how certainly he had known. Did not let herself wonder what it meant that a man as powerful as that, a man who could have dismissed her interference, who could have called it insubordination and ended her place in the tribunal with a single word, had instead crossed a throne room floor just to say thank you. She did not think about any of it. She was very nearly successful. It was not until she was back in her quarters, the door closed, the veil finally lifted from her face, and her reflection looking back at her from the small dark mirror above her writing table. Dark eyes, still lovely, still the same face that had cost her everything, that she realized her hands were shaking, not from fear, from something she had no safe name for, and no intention of examining until she had buried it deep enough that it could not find her in the dark. She pressed her palms flat against the table. She made herself breathe. In the tribunal quarters, Corinne would be waiting for her explanation. There would be a reckoning. There were rules, and she had broken one of them completely, and in front of the Alpha King himself. But in this moment, in the privacy of 4 walls and a locked door, Snow allowed herself one single thing. She pressed her hand against her chest, felt the unsteady rhythm there, and whispered to herself what she had not been able to say in front of anyone. "He knew it was me." She did not know yet whether that was a warning or the beginning of something she was wholly unprepared for. But somewhere in the city, in a palace that overlooked the whole of Calden, an Alpha King was asking questions about a woman in a black veil who had stood up in his court and refused to let an innocent boy be condemned. And he was not going to stop asking. Corinne was waiting. She was seated at the long table in the tribunal's inner chamber when Snow returned. Her hands folded in front of her, her expression carrying the particular stillness of a woman who had decided to be measured in her anger. The other women filed past without meeting Snow's eyes. 1 or 2 found something urgent to look at on the far wall. Snow closed the door behind her and stood. "Sit," Corinne said. Snow sat. The silence stretched long enough to have edges. Then Corinne said, "You spoke during proceedings." "I did." "You know the rule." "I know it," Snow said. "I broke it." "I am not going to tell you I didn't know what I was doing, because that would be a lie. I knew. I chose to speak anyway." Corinne looked at her for a long moment. "Why?" Snow folded her hands in her lap. She thought about the boy. About the way he had stood there not lifting his eyes. Not because he was guilty, but because he had already understood that guilt had been decided for him, and that his own knowledge of his innocence meant nothing. She had stood like that once. She knew the precise shape of that stillness. "'Cause the wrong verdict was forming," she said, "and I was the only one who could stop it. That is not your decision to make as an observer." "No," Snow agreed. "It wasn't. And if the boy had been guilty, I would have sat down and said nothing, and accepted the consequences of my silence as the price of learning my place. But he wasn't guilty, and I could see it, and I had the means to prove it. She met Corinne's eyes. I don't believe you would have wanted me to stay silent. Corinne was quiet. She was very good at being quiet in ways that made the other person feel the full weight of what they had said. Then she said slowly, "You will not do it again without my permission. I understand. If you have a theory, an instinct, a certainty, you bring it to me first. You do not stand up in the king's court and speak out of turn, not again." "Yes, Lady Corinne." Another silence. Then something shifted in Corinne's expression, something subtle, almost reluctant. "The instinct you showed today," she said. "That kind of insight, where does it come from?" Snow was quiet for a moment. From having been on the wrong side of a verdict that was arranged before the proceedings began. Corinne did not press her for more. She simply looked at Snow with those calm, knowing eyes and nodded once, slowly, as if something she had suspected had been confirmed. "Go," she said. "Rest." Snow rose. She was almost to the door when Corinne spoke again. "The gossip that started tonight, the women saying you stood up because you wanted the king to notice you. I heard it before you were back through the gates. I have already addressed it, but you should know it exists." Snow turned. "Thank you." "I don't tell you so that you can defend yourself," Corinne said. "I tell you so that you understand the cost of being exceptional in a space where others are watching." She paused. "I have seen women with your kind of mind before, not often, but I know what to do with them when they come." She picked up her quill. "Go to bed, Snow." Snow went, and she lay in the dark of her narrow quarters with the veil folded on the table beside her and the sound of the city outside the high window, and she thought about what Corinne had said, the cost of being exceptional. She already knew that cost. She had paid it with her husband's name and her own dignity, and 3 weeks of walking alone through territories that were not hers. She was not afraid of cost. She had simply thought she was done paying it. She closed her eyes. She told herself she was not thinking about Lucas. She almost believed it. Over the following weeks, she stopped being an observer. Corinne did not announce the change formally. It happened the way real changes tend to happen, gradually, then all at once. A case where Snow leaned in to murmur something to Corinne during a recess, and Corinne acted on it. Then a case where Corinne asked Snow's opinion before forming her own. Then a case where Corinne simply looked at Snow when the proceedings stalled and waited, and Snow understood that the waiting was permission. She was careful. She brought everything to Corinne first. She did not speak out of turn again. But she spoke, and what she said mattered. Each time the wrong person was held accountable. Each time the right person walked free. The other women watched her with complicated eyes. Some of them admired it. Snow could tell, could see it in the way they listened when she murmured during recesses, the way they angled toward her when Corinne was speaking. The small, unconscious lean of women who wanted to be near the thinking that was getting results. Others did not. She understood that too. She was new. She had arrived without history, without years of quiet service, without the slow accumulation of trust that most of them had spent years building. She had simply walked in and begun to be right about things, and there was nothing quite so difficult to forgive as someone who was right without having yet earned the right to be. She did not resent them for it. She had earned nothing yet. She was only beginning. The evenings were her own. She read. She wrote notes in the margins of case files, careful, small. In the shorthand she had developed over years of reading too many books in too little light. She wrote letters she did not send, to no one in particular, because she had discovered that writing things down made them easier to put away afterward. She did not go looking for Lucas. He found her instead. It was after a court session. A long one, 4 cases, the last one particularly tangled. And the tribunal women were filing out through the side corridor when a guard stepped forward and said, quietly, that His Majesty had requested a word with the woman who had spoken on the day of Cain's trial. The women around her went still. Corinne looked at Snow. Her expression was not readable. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," Snow said, a pause. "But you're going to." Snow said nothing. Corinne exhaled through her nose and stepped aside. The guard led her to a small receiving room off the main corridor. Not the throne room, not anything formal, just a room with 2 chairs and a window that looked out over the palace gardens. Lucas was already there. He was standing at the window with his hands behind his back, and when she entered, he turned. He looked different outside the throne room. Not smaller. He was not a man who became smaller in informal spaces, but less arranged. His expression was unguarded in a way it wasn't when the whole court was watching. "Thank you for staying," he said. "Your Majesty." She stood near the door. She did not take the chair he gestured toward. A brief pause. He looked at the empty chair, then at her, and did not press it. "I wanted to speak with you without the formality of the court around us. I hope that isn't unwelcome." "I want to be clear about something before we continue," Snow said. "I am not here for courtship. I am not open to it. I am not interested in it. If that is any part of what this is, I would rather know now and return to my quarters." Something moved across his face, not offense, more like recognition, as though he had expected exactly this and had prepared himself for it, and was now doing the quiet work of not reacting the wrong way. "It isn't," he said. "I have something far more selfish in mind. I want access to the way you think." Snow looked at him. "I have watched my court deliver verdicts for 11 years, he said. "I have good people around me, careful people. But there is a kind of seeing that cannot be taught. A pattern recognition that comes from something other than training. You have it, I want to understand it." He paused. "That is all." "Men say many things when they want something," Snow said. "They are very creative with their reasons." "Yes," he said simply, "we are. And I understand why you would measure me against that. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking for a conversation." She studied him from behind the veil. He did not fidget under the scrutiny. He simply stood and let her look. "Don't expect my answer to change," she said at last. "About the other thing, then I won't expect it," he said. "We'll see." She left before she could find out what that meant. She came back the next week, and the week after that, not because she had decided to. It happened the way the change in her status at the tribunal had happened. In increments small enough that she could tell herself each one didn't mean anything. While the shape of the thing grew clearer around her, they talked. Or Lucas asked and Snow answered, and Lucas listened in the complete and specific way that she had learned to recognize as rare. Most powerful men listened the way they read reports, scanning for the relevant portion, setting the rest aside. Lucas listened the way she read, the whole thing, nothing skipped, the margins examined. He wanted to know how she had learned what she knew, how the preparation for revealing the Morellian stain had come to her in the middle of a court session. "I read it," she said, "years ago. A text on compound chemistry used in estate inventory disputes. You remembered it in the moment. I remember most things." "Most people with that kind of memory become archivists," he said, "not tribunal investigators. Most people with that kind of memory haven't had occasion to need it for anything urgent," she replied. He looked at her carefully. "When you have been through certain situations," he said, quoting her words from weeks prior back at her, "you said that. When I asked how you learned to spot injustice in the evidence, I did say that. You don't want to tell me the situation." "No," she said. "I don't." He accepted it. That was the thing about him that kept catching her off guard. The acceptance. He did not push past the places she marked as closed. He noted them and moved around them the way a careful person moves around furnitures in a dark room, aware of the shape of the obstacle, respectful of what it might cost to knock it over. She had not known men who did that. Edric had, but Edric had been different. Edric had known her whole story from the beginning, had been part of her life before the story was a painful one. Lucas was a stranger, and strangers did not usually extend that kind of courtesy to women they wanted something from. She sat with that thought in the evenings and did not know what to do with it. Corinne noticed. Of course she did. "You're softening," Corinne said one evening, when the two of them were alone in the inner chamber after the other women had gone. Snow had removed her veil. She did that only here, only with Corinne, in the privacy of 4 walls and a relationship that had become, quietly and without Snow quite deciding it, something like friendship. Corinne looked at her the way she always did in these moments. directly, without the flinch that most people couldn't suppress when Snow's face was uncovered. Corinne had stopped being surprised by it after the first time. "I am not softening," Snow said. "You came back from those meetings looking lighter," Corinne said. "Last month you came back looking like you were preparing for an interrogation. Now you come back looking like you've just had a long drink of water." She tilted her head. "That's softening." Snow was quiet. "He is not Gad," Corinne said. The name landed like a stone. Snow looked up. "I know your story," Corinne said, gently but without apology. "You told me, and I know what Gad did. I know what the men after him did. I know why you built the wall." She paused. "But the wall was built against them. Don't mistake it for a wall against everyone." "The wall works," Snow said. "I am safe behind it." "You are sealed behind it," Corinne replied. "There is a difference." She set down her quill. "Your mate, Edric, he loved you." Snow's throat tightened. "Yes. Without condition?" "Without condition." "Then remember that," Corinne said, "when the anger tells you all men are the same. Your own history argues against it." Snow looked at the table. She pressed her palms flat against the wood, the same way she had pressed them in her quarters the night after the trial, when her hands had been shaking. "He told me something," she said, after a long moment. "Lucas, he said beauty fades but character remains, that he would choose character any day." She paused. "He said it because he thinks I'm ugly." Corinne blinked. "I'm sorry?" Snow looked up, and something in her expression was almost wry. "I told him the moon goddess cursed me, that I covered my face because I was too ugly for any man to want." Corinne stared at her. Then she pressed her lips together against something that was not quite a smile. "Snow. I needed to know if it was my face he was interested in or something else," Snow said. "It seemed like the most direct test. And what did he say?" "When you told him you were," Corinne cleared her throat, "supposedly too ugly for a man to want, he said the men were narrow-minded not to have seen what was inside me." Silence. "And when I said he only felt that way because he hadn't seen my actual face, that when he did, he would leave like all the others, he said beauty fades. Character remains." Snow was quiet for a moment. "He said he would choose character. Any day." Corinne looked at her for a long time. "And you don't believe him?" "I don't know what I believe," Snow said. "I know what happened the last time I believed in something." Corinne reached across the table and covered Snow's hand with her own. "Then take it slowly," she said. "No one is asking you to believe all at once. Just don't close the door before you know what's on the other side of it." Snows looked at their hands. Then she looked at the veil folded on the table beside her, black silk, armor and shield, and the one promise she had made to herself that she had kept. She said nothing, but she did not pull her hand away. It was 3 weeks later that Lucas made his intention known. He said it plainly, in their usual room without ceremony. "I have fallen in love with you, and I would want to mate you, Snow." She had been expecting it and had still not prepared for it adequately. She sat with the words for a moment and then said, equally plainly, "My answer is no." "I know that was your answer," he said. "I'm telling you my intention so that you have accurate information. You always prefer accurate information." Despite everything, something in her almost smiled. "My answer will remain no. So you've said, I mean it. I believe you," he said. And then, "I also believe that you said it to protect yourself, not because you actually want me to go away." The accuracy of that landed somewhere tender. She kept her face still. "You're very confident for a man being refused." "I'm not confident," he said. "I'm paying attention." He paused. "I will wait, and I will not push you past what you're willing to give. But I won't pretend I don't mean what I mean, because that would be a form of dishonesty, and you deserve better than that." She looked at him for a long time. "There is a condition," she said at last. "If I were ever to agree, which I am not saying I will, it would be on the condition that you mate me without removing my veil." Something crossed his face. Careful, thoughtful. "You believe your appearance would change things." "I know it would, Snow. It always does," she said, not bitterly. "Just as fact. It has always been the first thing. The beginning and end of everything men have ever wanted from me. I will not give any man that again." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. She looked up. "All right? I'll agree to your condition. He met her eyes, or met the place where her eyes were, behind the silk. On one of my own. When we are mated and alone, you will remove the veil, once, so I can see the woman I've chosen. The room was very quiet. Snow thought of Corinne's hand over hers, thought of Edric's voice in the mornings, thought of a man who had listened for months without pushing, who had accepted every closed door without complaint, who had said beauty fades and looked like he meant it. She thought of the veil, and what it had cost to put it on, and what it might cost, or give, to take it off for someone who had earned the right to see what was behind it. I will think about it, she said. It was not a yes, but it was not, for the first time in a very long time, an absolute no. She left him there and walked back through the palace corridor alone, the veil in place, the city noise filtering in through the high windows. Her pulse was unsteady. The feeling in her chest was one she had almost forgotten. Not fear, not grief, not the hollow vigilance she had lived inside for 2 years. Something that moved toward hope against her will. She told herself to be careful. She had been careful for 2 years, and careful had kept her whole. But careful had also kept her alone in a narrow room, with a locked door and a folded veil and letters she sent to no one. She did not have an answer to that, not yet. She was still turning it over the next morning when Corinne came to find her. Not in the inner chamber, but at her door, which was unusual. Corinne's expression was not its usual composed self. There was something careful in it, something contained. "What is it?" Snow asked. "A message came this morning," Corinne said, "through the Tribunal's formal channel. From an alpha named Gad." The blood in Snow's veins went cold. "He is requesting a formal audience with King Lucas," Corinne continued, watching Snow's face. "His stated purpose is to report that a woman he describes as having fled his pack after being found guilty of infidelity and dishonoring the memory of a fallen soldier, may be living within these borders under a false identity." The world was very still. "He has provided a description," Corinne said quietly. "Dark eyes, a woman cursed with beauty, a woman who conceals her face to hide who she is." Snow said nothing. She could not find her voice. The cold had moved from her blood into her hands, into the tips of her fingers, into the floor beneath her feet. "Snow." Corinne's voice was steady, a hand on her arm. "Look at me." Snow looked at her. "He doesn't know you're here." "Not for certain. He has a description and a guess." Corinne paused. "But if he comes, if Lucas receives him and shows him the Tribunal women—" "He will know me," Snow whispered. "He has seen my eyes, he will know." Corinne was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the deliberate voice of a woman who has made a decision, "Then Lucas needs to know first." "No," Snow said immediately. "Snow." Her voice cracked on the word. "Corinne, if Lucas knows, if he hears what they accused me of, he will." "He will what?" Corinne asked. "Believe them?" Snow pressed her hand to her mouth. She thought of the throne room, of Lucas crossing the floor, of his voice saying beauty fades, character remains, of a man who had waited and not pushed and accepted every closed door. She thought of how fast that could end, how fast a story could be arranged into a shape that looked true even when it wasn't. She had watched it happen to herself. She knew exactly how long it took. "He will have a choice to make," Snow said, "and I cannot bear to watch him make it." Corinne looked at her for a long time. "You love him," she said softly. The word hit Snow like a blow. She opened her mouth to deny it and found she could not. Not entirely, not honestly. There was something there, growing and unwanted and real, and denying it felt like one more lie in a life that had already cost her everything the truth had failed to protect. "I don't know," she said instead. "I don't know what it is, but I know that Gad is coming, and I know what he does to the truth when he gets hold of it, and I know," her voice broke just slightly, "I know I cannot survive another verdict delivered by a man I trusted." Corinne was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then you need to tell Lucas yourself, before Gad does. Because the only way his choice means anything, the only way you can trust it, is if he makes it knowing everything." Snow looked at her, at the steadiness in that face, at the woman who had taken her in without a question, and given her a home and a purpose, and the strange, unexpected gift of being known. "And if he chooses wrong?" Snow asked. Corinne's eyes were gentle. Then you will survive it, she said. Because you have survived everything else. But at least it will be real. Snow stood in the doorway of her narrow room with the veil folded on the table behind her and the city noise drifting up from the streets below. Gad was coming. He had found her. And somewhere in this palace, a king was waiting for an answer she had not yet given. Not knowing that the answer and the truth behind it and the whole shape of who she was and what had been done to her was about to be forced into the light. Whether she was ready or not, she went to him that night. Not because she was ready. She was not ready. She did not think she would ever be ready to do this particular thing, to sit before a powerful man and place the most damaged part of her story in his hands and wait to see what he did with it. She had lived inside that specific fear for 2 years, and it had not grown smaller with time. It had only grown more familiar, which was not the same thing. But Gad was coming. His message was already in the formal channel. Within days, perhaps less, he would be at these gates with his arranged version of the truth, and if that version arrived before hers, she would be standing in a throne room again. A different throne room, a different king, watching the shape of her life be decided by a man who had already made up his mind. She would not do that again. She would not sit down, not this time. The guard outside Lucas's private study looked at her with mild surprise. It was late, past the hour when the palace corridors were busy, but he had seen her enough times in the receiving room that he recognized the veil without needing her name. He went inside, he came back, he held the door open. Lucas was at his desk. He rose when she entered, which he always did, and she had never told him how much that small thing mattered to her, the automatic respect of it, the way it said without words that her presence warranted acknowledgement. "Snow," he said, and then, reading something in the way she was standing. "What's happened?" She crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk without waiting to be invited. She folded her hands in her lap. She made herself breathe. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All of it. From the beginning. And I need you to let me finish before you speak. Because if you say anything before I'm done, I don't think I'll be able to continue." He sat. He folded his own hands on the desks. "All right," he said. And so she told him. She told him about Edric, his voice, his laugh, the particular way he had of making her feel like the most important presence in any room. She told him about the beauty, which she had never asked for and never wanted, and which had followed her like a shadow she could not outrun. She told him about the nobles who came after, about Gad's visits and his offers, and the slow, patient way he had pressed against the boundaries she kept drawing, until she had made them so clear that he could no longer pretend he hadn't seen them. She told him about the night they decided she would not be persuaded. She told him about the charges, the witnesses, the court that had already decided. The way she had stood and said nothing in her own defense, because she had looked at those faces and understood that the verdict was already written, and her words would only be used against her. Twisted, reframed, offered as evidence of her guilt. She had chosen silence, and it had cost her everything, and she would wonder for the rest of her life whether speaking would have cost her less. She told him about the parade. She said it plainly. She did not dress it in softer language, because it did not deserve softer language. They had stripped her of her husband's name, and walked her around the pack grounds with the whole community watching and throwing things and screaming. She told him about the veil, about standing outside the pack gates with nothing and understanding that her face, this face that had never been anything but a burden disguised as a gift, had been the cause of every loss she had ever suffered, about the decision she had made in that moment, cold and clear and absolute, never again. No man would see it. No man would use it. She was done. She told him that Gad's message had arrived that morning, that he was coming, that he had her description, and that when he saw her eyes, he would know her, and he would stand in this very palace and tell Lucas the same story he had told her pack, dressed in the same borrowed grief, wearing the same performed sadness, and every word of it would be a lie arranged to look like truth. She stopped talking. The room was very quiet. Lucas had not moved. He had not spoken. He had done exactly what she asked. Held his silence, held his stillness, let her finish. And now he sat across from her, with his hands still folded on the desk, and his expression carrying something she could not read, something that moved beneath the surface of his face like deep water. She waited. "How long?" he said at last. "Did you carry all of that alone?" She blinked. Of all the things she had prepared herself for, the questions, the skepticism, the careful political calculation of a king deciding whether to believe a veiled woman over an alpha with standing. She had not prepared for that. 2 years, she said. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in his expression had shifted, settled into a kind of quiet that she recognized, not from him, but from herself. The quiet of someone who has understood something, and is now deciding what to do with the understanding. "Snow," he said, "look at me." She was already looking at him. She said so. "I know," he said. "I mean, look at me and tell me if what you see is a man who is about to choose an alpha with a political grudge over a woman who has given me nothing but the truth for 6 months." The tightness in her chest shifted. "I don't know what you'll choose," she said. "I have been wrong before about what men would choose." "Then let me be clear," he said. He rose from behind the desk, slowly, deliberately, giving her time to see that he was not reaching for anything except the space between them. He came around to her side and sat on the edge of the desk, closer, so that she had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. "Gad will arrive. I will receive him, because refusing an alpha formal audience creates more trouble than it solves. But I will not receive him without knowing what I know now. And what I know now is this." He paused. "I know you, not your face, not your history, not the things that were done to you that were never yours to carry. I know how you think. I know what you care about. I know that you stood up in my throne room for a boy you had never met and risked your place in the only safe home you'd found because you could not sit down while injustice was being assembled in front of you." He held her gaze. "That is not the character of a woman who dishonors her mate's memory. And I will not pretend otherwise, because someone with a title and a grievance has decided to come and tell me a different story." Snow's eyes were burning. She pressed her lips together. "You haven't seen my face," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. "You say it doesn't matter, but you haven't." "I know," he said, "and I meant every word I said about character. But Snow," something gentle entered his voice, "I also meant what I said about wanting to see you, not to judge you, just to see you, all of you, the part you've been keeping safest." She sat with that for a long moment. Then she reached up, slowly, the way he had moved, giving herself time to understand what she was doing, and lifted the veil. The air touched her face, cool and real. Lucas did not move. He looked at her, and the expression that crossed his face was not what she had spent 2 years bracing herself against. It was not hunger, not the particular light that came into men's eyes when they saw her and began calculating how to make her theirs. It was not surprise arranged quickly into flattery. It was not even simple admiration, though that was there. It was something quieter, something that looked, against all reason, like recognition, like a man who had already known the person inside the face and was now simply seeing the rest of her. "You," he said softly, "told me you were ugly. I needed to know if it was my face you wanted." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "And," she said, "you said beauty fades, character remains. I meant it." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm sitting here." He reached out and she did not flinch, and that, she thought, was the truest measure of how far she had come, and his hand covered hers where it rested on her knee. "Marry me," he said. "Not because I'm asking now, and not because Gad is coming, and a mated woman under a king's protection is harder to slander. Marry me because I have been paying attention for 6 months, and what I have seen is the person I want beside me for every difficult thing that comes next." Snow looked down at his hand over hers. She thought of the veil, of what it had cost to put it on, and what it had just cost to take it off, and how both of those costs had, in the end, been exactly what they needed to be. "Yes," she said. It was the simplest word she had spoken in 2 years. The mating ceremony was quiet. Lucas had not wanted spectacle, and Snow had not wanted witnesses, So they were married in the small private chamber at the eastern end of the palace with Corinne and 2 members of the king's council as witness, and the whole thing done before the morning court convened. The nobles learned of it an hour later when Lucas announced it from his throne. The hall was not quiet afterward. There were questions. Of course there were questions. She was unknown, unveiled in public for the first time, standing beside the king with her face uncovered, and the mark of their mating at her throat. And the court had opinions about all of it. They were delivered in the careful language of men who knew better than to challenge a king directly, but had every intention of making their displeasure legible. Lucas answered each one with the patience of a man who has already made a decision and has no interest in unmaking it. Her name, he said, is Snow. She serves the tribunal and has done so with a distinction that has improved the quality of justice delivered in this court. She is my mate and your Luna. You will extend her every courtesy that title carries. A pause. Then, with the particular quiet authority of a man who has said the last thing he intends to say on a subject, we are done discussing it. They were done discussing it. Snow stood beside him and did not look down. She had learned, somewhere in the past 6 months, how to stand in a room full of people who were looking at her and hold her own gaze. Corinne caught her eye from the tribunal section and said nothing, just inclined her head, very slightly, in the way of a woman who had been right about something important and was too dignified to say so. Snow almost smiled. Gad arrived 2 days later. Snow knew the moment he entered the palace grounds, not because she saw him, but because Lucas told her. And Lucas told her because he had promised to tell her everything in advance so that she would never be surprised inside his court. That was the kind of man he was, she was learning. The kind who understood that safety was not just physical. She stood with Corinne in the tribunal section when Gad was brought into the throne room. He was older than she remembered. Or perhaps she was simply seeing him differently now, with 2 years of distance, and the particular clarity that came from having survived what he had put her through. He was shorter than her memory had made him. His certainty, which she had once found suffocating, looked from here merely like the performance of a man who had never been seriously questioned. He bowed to Lucas. He smiled. He began to speak. He told the story well, she would give him that. He had always been good at stories. He spoke of a fallen soldier, Edric, though he did not say the name with anything resembling respect, and of a widow who had dishonored his memory. He spoke of evidence and witnesses and a community's justified outrage. He spoke of a woman who had fled rather than accept accountability, who was living now under concealment in another king's territory. He was sorry to bring this before His Majesty, truly, deeply sorry, but what could a responsible alpha do, who matched the description of a veiled woman recently seen in the king's court? He paused. He let the weight of it settle. Then Lucas said, "Are you finished?" Gad blinked. "Your Majesty," I asked. Lucas said, "If you are finished." The hall was very still. Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." Lucas settled back in his throne. "Then I will tell you what I know. I know the woman you are describing. I know her name, and I know her history, and I know it in her own words, which she gave me before you arrived, because she is not a woman who hides from the truth. She is a woman who was destroyed by a version of it that you arranged." His voice was even, almost pleasant. The evenness was worse than anger would have been. "I also know something you may not have anticipated. My mate has a particular talent for evidence, for patterns in testimony, for the way guilt arranges itself differently than grief." He paused. "I asked her to help me look at yours." Gad's smile had gone. "Your witnesses," Lucas continued, "the 2 men who testified against her in your pack's court. I sent a message 4 days ago to the Eastern Territories Records Office. One of those men received a land grant from your personal holdings 3 months after the trial. The other had a debt to your treasury cleared." He tilted his head. "Would you like to explain that?" The hall was completely silent. Gad said nothing. There was nothing to say. His mouth opened once and closed again, and Snow watched from behind her veil. She had put it back on for this, not out of shame but out of strategy, because she was tribunal now, and tribunal women covered their faces in court. and felt something in her chest release that she had not known was still held tight. Furthermore, Lucas said, I have sent word to 3 nobles in your pack, who were known to have expressed interest in the widow of your former commander. Interest she refused. 2 of them have already responded. Their testimony will be formalized within the week. Gad looked at the floor, then at his hands, then at nothing. You fabricated a verdict, Lucas said. You used the grief of a community that had just lost soldiers to cover your own conduct. You destroyed an innocent woman's name and cast her out with nothing because she refused to be taken. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. That is what happened, and we are going to be very clear about that, here and in your pack, and in every formal record that touches your name. He looked at the 2 guards beside his throne. The rest happened quickly, formally, with the machinery of proper justice, which moved slowly when it was being careful and efficiently when it had already been careful, and was now simply executing what the evidence required. Gad was removed, not loudly, just removed. The formal findings took 10 days. Snow participated in building them. Of course she did. Corrine supervised. Between the 2 of them, and with access to Lucas's considerable reach across territories, they assembled a case file so thorough that when it was finally submitted to the Inter-Pack Judicial Council, the deliberation lasted less than a morning. Gad was stripped of his alpha title. The nobles who had testified falsely were stripped of their ranks. The verdict against Snow was formally overturned and struck from every record that carried it. Her husband's honors, the commendations, the property, the holdings that had been seized from her when they took his name, were legally reinstated. All of it returned. She sat with the documents in Corrine's chamber when they arrived, and she held them, and she did not cry. She had thought she might cry, but what she felt was not grief releasing. Grief had released slowly over months in small and private increments that she had not named while they were happening. What she felt was something older and quieter, something like being set down after a very long time of being carried. She looked up at Corrine. I want you to have the property, she said. Corrine went very still. Snow, I mean it. Snow set the documents on the table and folded her hands over them. The holdings, the house, whatever the inheritance amounts to. I want you to have it. She paused. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me work and a name I could stand behind, and a door I could lock and trust that it would hold. You are the reason I was here long enough for any of the rest of it to happen. She looked at Corrine steadily. I am not a woman who forgets what she owes. Corrine looked at the documents, then at Snow. Her eyes were bright, which was not an expression Snow had seen on her face before. This composed, silver-haired woman who had presided over the tribunal for 2 decades with the equanimity of someone who had decided long ago not to be surprised by anything. You are going to be a remarkable Luna, Corrine said at last. I learned from a remarkable woman, Snow replied. Corrine cleared her throat. She looked away. She picked up her quill. Go home, Snow, she said. Your husband is waiting. The palace in the evening was a different thing than the palace in the day. In the day it was full of movement, purpose, the organized noise of a large household running itself. In the evening it quieted to something warmer, candlelight instead of torches, the distant sound of the kitchen settling, the particular hush of corridors that had stopped being thoroughfares and become simply hallways leading to rooms where people rested. Snow walked through it without the veil. She had not made an announcement about it, had not told the staff or the council or anyone who might have opinions. She had simply stopped putting it on inside the palace walls, and the palace had adjusted, the way households adjust to the preferences of the people who live in them. Quietly, without ceremony, as though it had always been this way. She found Lucas in their sitting room. He was reading, or had been reading. The book was open on his knee, but he was looking at the window, at the city lights below, with the expression of a man whose thoughts have traveled further than the page. He looked up when she came in, and the expression changed, not dramatically, just settled, the way a room settles when you find the right temperature. How is Corrine? He asked. Composed, Snow said. which means she is deeply moved and has decided not to show it. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. She said to tell you that the tribunal will be submitting a formal commendation for the conduct of this investigation. She could tell me herself. She knows. She's making a point about proper channels. Snow paused. I think she likes you better now that she's decided you deserve it. Lucas smiled. It was a good smile. Not the careful, measured expression he wore in court, but the one that reached his eyes when he was not performing anything for anyone. And you, he said. How are you? She considered the question honestly, the way she considered everything. I am sitting in a warm room, she said, beside a man who chose me correctly, in a kingdom where I am known by my real name, on the day that my husband's honor was formally restored and my own name cleared. She paused. I think I am better than I have been in a very long time. He took her hand. She let him. Outside, the city of Calden spread itself across the hill in a scatter of warm lights, and the night was quiet, and nothing was coming for them tonight. She knew that tomorrow would bring its own complications. It always did. She was Luna now, which was a word that had once meant danger, and now meant something else entirely. There would be work and politics, and the long, unglamorous business of building something together that was meant to last. She knew how to do hard things. She had been doing hard things her whole life, but she had not, before tonight, known how different it felt to do them alongside someone who intended to stay. Lucas turned to look at her, really look at her, the way he had the night she lifted the veil. With that expression she still did not entirely have a word for, and she looked back at him without flinching, without hiding, without the reflex of concealment that had kept her safe for 2 years and had served its purpose and was no longer needed. I used to think, she said quietly, that the veil was the only thing standing between me and being destroyed again. And now? He asked. She looked at their joined hands, at the candle on the table beside them, burning small and steady. Now I think it was something I needed to wear, she said, until I found something better to stand behind. What's that? He asked. She looked at him. Someone who already knew me, she said, before he ever saw my face. Lucas brought her hand to his lips. He held it there for a moment, not dramatically, not with the performance of romance, just with the quiet certainty of a man who has found the thing he was looking for and is in no hurry to let it go. Outside, the city moved through its evening. Somewhere in it, Corinne was reading a deed with her name on it and not crying about it. Somewhere beyond the borders, a man who had once held Snow's name in his hands and crushed it was discovering what it meant to have power correctly taken away. And here, in a warm room with candlelight and a book left open on a chair, and the particular piece of a life that had finally, after everything, arrived at something real, Snow sat beside her mate and breathed. Just breathed. The moon goddess had given her a face that men had spent years trying to possess. She had found a man who wanted instead to know her. That at last was a gift she could accept. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If Snow's story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath in that throne room, or whispering yes when she finally lifted the veil, leave a comment below and tell me the moment that stayed with you. I read every single one. And if you want to be the first to know when the next story drops, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories coming. I'll see you in the next one.